The rain hammered against the windshield as Marcus Thompson drove through the quiet suburban streets of Arlington, Virginia. It was nearly midnight on a Tuesday in late September, and the director of the National Security Agency was exhausted. He had just left a classified briefing at the Pentagon that had run 4 hours longer than scheduled. All he wanted was to get home to his wife and collapse into bed. Marcus was a man who carried himself with quiet authority. At 52 years old, he had spent 3 decades serving his country, rising through the ranks of military intelligence before being appointed to lead one of the most powerful intelligence agencies in the world. But tonight, in his casual jeans and worn Georgetown University sweatshirt, he looked like any other middle-aged man trying to get home after a long day. His phone buzzed with another urgent message, but Marcus ignored it. Whatever crisis needed his attention could wait 20 minutes until he got home. He turned onto Maple Street, a tree-lined residential road where modest brick houses sat behind neatly trimmed lawns. This was the kind of neighborhood where people knew their neighbors, where kids still played outside until the streetlights came on. Marcus had driven this route 1,000 times, but tonight something felt different. In his rearview mirror, he noticed a police cruiser 2 cars back. He thought nothing of it at first. Police patrols were common in this area. He continued at exactly the speed limit, signaling properly at every turn. But when he turned left onto Berkeley Avenue, the cruiser turned as well. Then another police car appeared from a side street, falling in behind the first. Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest, a feeling he had experienced too many times in his life despite all his accomplishments and the power of his position. He was a black man driving alone at night, and he knew what often came next. His instincts told him to pull over immediately to avoid any excuse for escalation. But he was only 3 blocks from home. His house was right there with the porch light his wife always left on for him. He decided to just make it home. That decision would change everything. As Marcus signaled to turn into his driveway, the night exploded with red and blue lights. Not just from the 2 cars behind him, but from 3 more that seemed to materialize from nowhere. 5 police vehicles surrounded his car before he could even bring it to a complete stop. Spotlights flooded his vehicle with blinding white light. The loudspeaker crackled to life with a command that sent ice through his veins. "Driver, turn off the engine and throw the keys out the window." "Now!" Marcus complied immediately, his hands shaking slightly as he tossed his keys onto the wet pavement. He had received training for hostage situations, terrorist encounters, and international incidents, but nothing prepared you for being treated like a criminal in front of your own home. "Put your hands on the steering wheel where we can see them." He placed his palms flat against the wheel, fingers spread wide. Through the glare of the spotlights, he could see shadows moving, officers taking positions behind their vehicles. He counted at least 8, maybe 10 officers. This was not a routine traffic stop. Something had gone terribly wrong. Open the door with your left hand slowly and step out of the vehicle. Marcus did exactly as instructed, moving with deliberate care. The rain soaked through his sweatshirt within seconds. He stood beside his car, hands raised as the spotlights painted him as a target. "Get on your knees. Hands behind your head." The wet pavement was cold and hard through his jeans. Marcus laced his fingers behind his head, his mind racing through possibilities. Had his car been reported stolen? Had someone made a false report? Or was this simply another case of driving while black in America? From his position on the ground, Marcus could see his front door open. His wife Sarah stood in the doorway, her hand over her mouth in horror. She started to step outside, but Marcus called out to her. "Sarah, stay inside. Lock the door and call my office."
"Quiet,"
an officer shouted. "Don't move and don't speak." 2 officers approached from behind, their footsteps splashing through puddles. Marcus felt the cold metal of handcuffs snap around his wrists tighter than necessary. They pulled him to his feet, and that is when he finally saw the officer in charge. Sergeant Dale Mitchell was a thick-necked man in his early 40s with a crew cut and a permanent scowl. He approached Marcus with his hand resting on his service weapon, his jaw clenched tight, but it was his eyes that told Marcus everything he needed to know. There was no uncertainty there, no professional assessment of a situation. There was only prejudgment and barely concealed hostility. "Well, well, well," Mitchell said, looking Marcus up and down with obvious disdain. "You led us on quite a chase, didn't you?" "I did not run from anyone," Marcus said calmly. "I was simply driving home." "That's not what dispatch says." "We got a call about a suspicious black male in a vehicle matching yours, driving erratically through the neighborhood. When we tried to pull you over, you refused to stop. I signaled every turn and drove the speed limit. I was 3 blocks from my house." Mitchell's laugh was harsh and mocking. "Your house? You expect me to believe you live in this neighborhood?" The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, not because they were surprising, but because they were so depressingly familiar. He had heard variations of this doubt his entire life. When he was at MIT, campus security had stopped him multiple times, refusing to believe he was a student. When he bought his first house in a nice neighborhood, a neighbor had called the police, assuming he was casing the area for robberies. Even in his military uniform, wearing his rank and decorations, he had been questioned about whether he had stolen valor. But this was different. This was happening on his own driveway in front of his home, while he held one of the highest security clearances in the nation. And it was happening because these officers looked at him and saw only a threat, only a suspect, only someone who did not belong. "Check his identification," Mitchell ordered one of his officers. "I have my wallet in my back pocket," Marcus said. "May I tell you that I am also carrying a weapon in a shoulder holster under my sweatshirt. It is registered and I have a permit." The atmosphere immediately intensified. Officers who had started to relax suddenly went rigid again, hands moving back to their weapons. "He's armed," someone shouted. "Everyone stay alert," Mitchell barked. He grabbed Marcus roughly by the shoulder, spinning him around. "Why didn't you tell us you had a gun?" "I just did. I wanted to inform you before anyone found it and reacted badly." Mitchell's face reddened with anger. "Don't tell me how to do my job." He gestured to another officer. "Remove the weapon, carefully." The officer unzipped Marcus's sweatshirt and removed the Sig Sauer P229 from its holster. He checked the weapon, then showed it to Mitchell. "It's loaded," the officer said. "Of course it is," Mitchell sneered. "Now we've got possession of a concealed weapon. Read him his rights." "Wait," Marcus said, his voice still controlled but with an edge of steel entering it. "You need to contact your commanding officer immediately. I am an employee of the federal government and there are protocols that must be followed." Mitchell stepped closer, invading Marcus's personal space in a classic intimidation tactic. "The only protocol here is that you're under arrest for evading police, carrying a concealed weapon, and whatever else I decide to charge you with. I don't care if you work at the post office or the DMV." It was at this moment that Marcus realized just how dangerous the situation had become. These officers were not interested in facts or explanation. They had made up their minds about who he was and what he represented. Every word he said, every attempt to explain was only making things worse. Mitchell was escalating, looking for any excuse to justify increased force. Marcus had spent years studying human behavior, reading intelligence reports on how situations spiral out of control, analyzing moments where communication breaks down and violence erupts. He recognized all the warning signs now. The aggressive posture, the dismissive responses, the need to dominate and control. This was going to get worse before it got better. He thought of all the names he had read in reports, all the families he had seen on the news, all the incidents that had started just like this. A routine stop, a misunderstanding, pride and prejudice on one side, fear and frustration on the other, and then suddenly, tragically, someone who should have made it home safely never did. Marcus made a decision. He would de-escalate on his end, give them no reason, no excuse, no justification for violence. He would be the calm in their storm, even as his heart pounded and anger burned in his chest. "Officer Mitchell," he said quietly, "I understand you are doing your job. I am not resisting. I am cooperating fully, but you need to know who I am before this situation goes any further. My name is Marcus Thompson, and I am the director of the National Security Agency." For a moment there was absolute silence except for the rain drumming on car roofs and pavement. Then Mitchell threw his head back and laughed, a sound without any humor in it. "Oh, that's good," he said, still chuckling. "That's really good. First you live in this nice neighborhood, now you're running the NSA. What's next? Are you going to tell me you're friends with the president?" The other officers joined in the laughter, and Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. They were not just disbelieving him, they were mocking him. The situation was spiraling further out of control, and these men were enjoying it. Marcus looked up at his house, at Sarah standing in the doorway with the phone pressed to her ear. He hoped she had gotten through to someone who could help, because in this moment, With rain soaking through his clothes and handcuffs cutting into his wrists, surrounded by armed officers who saw him as nothing more than a criminal who had told an absurd lie, Marcus Thompson understood that his titles and achievements and years of service meant absolutely nothing at all. The rain continued to fall as Marcus stood in handcuffs on his own driveway, watching his life's work and reputation dissolve into mockery and disbelief. Sergeant Mitchell circled him like a predator, clearly enjoying the power dynamic he had established. The other officers maintained their positions, weapons still accessible, treating Marcus as if he were a dangerous criminal rather than a man who had simply tried to drive home. "You know what I think?" Mitchell said, his voice dripping with contempt. "I think you watched too many movies. I think you saw that fancy house and thought you'd try to scare us with some big lie about being important. Well, it's not going to work." Marcus took a deep breath, fighting to maintain his composure. Every instinct screamed at him to assert his authority, to demand they verify his identity immediately, to make them understand the magnitude of their mistake. But he had seen too many situations where aggressive assertion by a black man was interpreted as a threat, where demanding respect was twisted into defiance of authority. So instead he spoke with measured calm. "My identification is in my wallet. It includes my government credentials. All I ask is that you look at them before proceeding further." Mitchell gestured impatiently to the officer who had removed Marcus's weapon. "Check the wallet. Let's see what kind of fake ID our director here is carrying." The young officer, whose name tag read Patterson, pulled the wallet from Marcus's back pocket. He opened it and his expression immediately changed. The smug confidence drained from his face, replaced by something that looked like concern. He stared at the credential card for several long seconds, then looked up at Marcus with wide eyes. "Sergeant," Patterson said, his voice uncertain. "You need to see this. What is it?" Mitchell asked, annoyed at being interrupted in his performance of authority. Patterson walked over and handed him the wallet, open to display the credential. Mitchell glanced at it dismissively, then did a double take. His face went through several shades of color as he read and reread the card. The credential was not something that could be easily faked. It had multiple security features, including a holographic seal that shifted colors in the light, embedded chips, and encoding that only government scanners could read properly. The card identified Marcus Edward Thompson as the director of the National Security Agency, with all the accompanying clearances and authorities. His photograph on the credential matched the man standing before them, though in the photo he wore a suit and tie rather than a college sweatshirt. "This could be fake," Mitchell said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "It's not fake," Marcus replied, "and you know it. Those credentials cannot be replicated. If you scan the chip with your mobile data terminal, it will verify my identity and my position directly with the federal database." Mitchell's jaw clenched. He was trapped between his prejudice and the growing evidence that he had made a catastrophic error. But rather than backing down, he doubled down on his initial assessment. "Even if this is real, it doesn't explain why you ran from us. It doesn't explain why you were driving suspiciously through this neighborhood. Important people don't act the way you acted tonight." "I didn't run from anyone," Marcus said, his patience finally beginning to fray. "I drove 3 blocks to my home at the exact speed limit, signaling every turn. If that is your definition of evasion, then your definition is wrong. And important people, as you call them, do live in normal neighborhoods. We shop at grocery stores, we get our mail, we come home tired after long days. Being the director of an intelligence agency doesn't make me less human or less black. And it certainly doesn't mean I should expect to be held at gunpoint in my own driveway." The other officers had started to shift uncomfortably. They were beginning to realize the situation was not what they had assumed. But Mitchell was not ready to let go of his authority, his narrative, his need to be right. "You still have an unregistered weapon," Mitchell tried. "The weapon is registered to me through the federal system. You will find that when you run the serial number, I have carried that weapon legally for 15 years across multiple states. I notified you of its presence immediately for everyone's safety." Mitchell's face had gone from red to pale. He was running out of justifications. But admitting error would mean admitting he had treated a senior federal official like a common criminal, based on nothing more than the color of his skin and his own assumptions. It would mean acknowledging his own racism, and men like Mitchell rarely had that kind of courage. Before the standoff could continue, a black SUV with government plates came screaming around the corner. followed by 2 more vehicles. They stopped in formation, blocking the street. The doors opened and 4 men in dark suits emerged, moving with the practiced efficiency of federal agents. The lead agent was a tall white man with silver hair and an expression that could freeze water. "What in God's name is happening here?" Deputy Director James Morrison demanded as he strode toward the scene. Morrison was Marcus's second-in-command at the NSA, a career intelligence officer who had worked with Marcus for over a decade. His presence meant that Sarah had managed to get through to the right people. Morrison's eyes swept the scene, taking in Marcus in handcuffs surrounded by local police, the weapons, the aggressive posture of the officers. His expression went from angry to absolutely furious. "Remove those handcuffs from Director Thompson immediately," Morrison ordered, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Mitchell finally found himself facing someone who matched his expectation of what power looked like. A white man, in an expensive suit with an air of command. Suddenly, Mitchell's certainty crumbled. "We were responding to a call about suspicious activity," Mitchell stammered. "We didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't bother to verify before drawing weapons on a federal official," Morrison cut him off. "Remove the handcuffs now." Patterson rushed forward and unlocked the cuffs. Marcus rubbed his wrists where the metal had cut into his skin, leaving red marks that would bruise by morning. Morrison stepped closer, his voice dropping to a tone that was somehow more threatening for its quietness. "Director Thompson oversees intelligence operations that protect this entire nation. He has direct access to the president. He manages programs that you don't have the clearance to even know exist, and you handcuffed him in the rain like a criminal because he drove to his own house." Mitchell tried to respond, but Morrison held up his hand. "I want the name of your commanding officer. I want the badge numbers of every officer present. I want the dispatch recording that initiated this stop. And I want the dash camera footage from all of these vehicles. You have 30 seconds to start providing that information, or I will have federal agents collected by force, and we will add obstruction to the list of problems you're facing." Other officers immediately began scrambling to comply, speaking rapidly into their radios and pulling out notebooks. The situation had reversed completely. Now they were the ones being interrogated, being made to account for their actions. Now they were the ones who understood they had made a terrible mistake. But Marcus felt no satisfaction in watching them squirm. He felt only exhaustion and a deep familiar anger that came from knowing this happened all the time. To people who did not have deputy directors to rescue them, to people who did not have credentials that could cut through prejudice, to people who were just trying to get home safely. Morrison turned to Marcus, his expression softening with concern. "Are you all right, sir? Do you need medical attention?" "I'm fine, James. Just wet and tired and very, very angry." "You have every right to be." Morrison looked back at the police officers with disgust. "This is going to have consequences. Serious consequences." Marcus shook his head. "Right now, I just want to go inside my house. I want to hold my wife and explain to her why she had to watch her husband be treated like a criminal. That's all I want." But even as he said it, Marcus knew it was not that simple. This incident would not just go away. It would have to be reported through official channels. There would be investigations, interviews, reports. The story would leak to the media. His private humiliation would become public knowledge. And through it all, he would have to maintain the dignity and composure expected of someone in his position, even though inside he felt the same fear and rage that every black person in America knew too well. Sarah had come down from the porch, ignoring the rain, and wrapped her arms around him. She was crying, her whole body shaking. They had been married for 26 years. She had stood beside him through wars, through dangerous assignments, through the stress of his current position. But she had never seen him like this, never seen him treated with such contempt and disrespect. "I thought they were going to shoot you," she whispered against his chest. "I thought I was going to watch them shoot you." "I'm okay," Marcus said, holding her tight. "I'm okay." But that was a lie. Nothing about this was okay. Nothing about living. In a country where you could rise to the highest levels of service and still be seen as suspicious, still be treated as a threat, still be judged by the color of your skin before any other consideration, was okay. Morrison had his phone out making calls. Within minutes, more federal vehicles arrived along with members of Marcus's security detail who should have been protecting him, but had been delayed by a flat tire that now seemed suspiciously convenient. Mitchell and his officers were separated, being interviewed individually by federal agents who were documenting everything about the stop. A senior federal agent approached Marcus with an evidence bag containing his weapon. "We've documented everything, sir. Your weapon is cleared and we have verified all your permits. I need to ask if you want to press charges against the officers involved." Marcus looked at Mitchell, who stood beside his patrol car looking simultaneously defiant and terrified. The sergeant still had not apologized. He had not shown any remorse or understanding of what he had done. In his mind, he had probably convinced himself he was just doing his job, that anyone would have made the same assumptions, that this was all just an unfortunate misunderstanding, rather than an act of racial profiling backed by the force of law. "I need time to think about that," Marcus said. "Right now, I need to process what happened." "Understood, sir. We will continue our investigation regardless. This kind of behavior toward a federal official cannot be tolerated." But Marcus knew the real issue was not about him being a federal official. It was about him being a black man who had been presumed guilty of something, anything, because prejudice saw threat where there was none. If he had not been the NSA director, if he had just been Marcus Thompson coming home from his job as a teacher or an accountant or a sales manager, would anyone care? Would there be federal agents documenting everything? Would there be consequences for the officers? The answer made his stomach turn. This outrage, this response, this attention was all because of his position, not because of the injustice itself. Thousands of people experienced worse every day, and there were no deputy directors rushing to their defense, no federal investigations, no consequences at all. As Morrison escorted him toward his house, Marcus looked back at the scene that was still unfolding on his street. Neighbors had come out onto their porches, watching the drama. By tomorrow, everyone would know what happened. Some would be sympathetic. Others would probably wonder if there was more to the story, if maybe Marcus had done something to deserve suspicion. Because that was always the question when something like this happened to a black person, even one with impeccable credentials. What did they do to provoke it? Marcus climbed the steps to his front door, his legs suddenly feeling weak. Sarah kept her arm around him, supporting him. At the doorway, he paused and looked back one more time at the police officers being interviewed, at the flashing lights reflecting off wet pavement, at the scene of his humiliation. "This is going to change things," Morrison said quietly beside him. "When this story gets out, it's going to start important conversations." Marcus nodded, but he felt no sense of victory or purpose. He just felt tired and cold and old, because he knew that conversations were not enough. He had spent his entire life having conversations about race, about prejudice, about justice, and still here he was, at 52 years old, at the pinnacle of his career, being handcuffed in front of his own home by officers who looked at him and saw only a threat. Inside, his house was warm and quiet, a sanctuary from the chaos outside. But Marcus knew he would never feel quite as safe here again. This place where he had laughed with friends, celebrated birthdays, built a life with his family, had been violated by the very people sworn to protect it. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice whispered what he already knew. If this could happen to the director of the National Security Agency, what chance did anyone else have? Marcus sat at his kitchen table wrapped in a blanket, a cup of tea growing cold in front of him. Sarah had insisted he change into dry clothes and warm up, but the chill he felt went deeper than rain-soaked clothing. Morrison sat across from him, along with two other NSA officials who had arrived within the hour. Outside, federal agents were still documenting the scene, interviewing witnesses and collecting evidence. "We need to discuss the next steps," Morrison said gently. He knew Marcus well enough to understand that his boss was not just processing an inconvenient incident. This was personal trauma layered on top of a lifetime of similar experiences. Marcus wrapped his hands around the tea mug, seeking warmth. "What happens now depends on what we find out. Who called in the initial report? Why did they target me specifically? And why did 5 police cars respond to what was supposedly a suspicious person call?" "We are already pulling those records," Morrison replied. "But there is another dimension we need to consider. This incident is going to become public knowledge. We can try to contain it, but with this many officers involved, This many witnesses. The story will leak within 48 hours. We need to decide how to handle the narrative. Marcus looked up sharply. Handle the narrative? James, there is only one narrative. A black man was racially profiled and held at gunpoint by police despite having done nothing wrong. There is nothing to handle. There is only truth to tell. Morrison shifted uncomfortably. I understand your anger, Marcus, I do. But your position makes this complicated. There are national security implications. Foreign intelligence services could use this incident to undermine confidence in American institutions. Hostile actors could weaponize this story to divide Americans along racial lines. They do not need my story to do that, Marcus said, his voice hard. Those divisions already exist. That lack of confidence is already justified. Foreign intelligence did not create the racism that led to tonight. We did that ourselves. Sarah, who had been standing by the sink, turned to face them. Her eyes were red from crying, but her voice was steady and fierce. My husband has given 30 years of his life to this country. He has missed birthdays and anniversaries. He has put himself in danger more times than I can count. He has protected Americans who will never know his name or what he sacrificed for them. And tonight, officers who represent this country he serves treated him like garbage. So do not sit in my kitchen and talk about narratives and national security when what happened here tonight was just plain wrong. The room fell silent. Marcus reached for Sarah's hand and she moved to stand beside him, her hand on his shoulder. Morrison looked down at his notes, properly chastised. You are absolutely right, Sarah. I apologize. That was insensitive and wrong of me. He looked back at Marcus. Whatever you decide to do, the agency will support you fully. If you want to press charges, we will back you. If you want to go public, we will help craft a statement that speaks your truth. And if you want to handle this quietly through internal channels, we can do that too. This is your decision. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, thinking through the implications of each path. Going public would mean intense media scrutiny, not just of this incident, but of his entire life and career. It would mean becoming a symbol, a talking point in the endless debate about race and policing in America. It would mean watching pundits dissect his experience on cable news, reading think pieces about what his story meant for society, enduring the inevitable backlash from those who would insist he was exaggerating or playing the race card. But staying quiet felt like a betrayal. How many people had experienced similar or worse treatment and had no voice, no platform, no deputy director to call for help? How many had been arrested, beaten, or killed in situations that started exactly like this? If he had the platform to speak truth, did he not have an obligation to use it? Before Marcus could respond, his personal phone buzzed. It was a text from his daughter, Jennifer, a civil rights attorney in New York. She had already heard somehow. Her message was brief. Dad, are you okay? This is all over Twitter. Marcus felt his stomach drop. It is already out there, he said, showing the text to Morrison. Someone must have filmed it or called it in. Morrison pulled out his tablet and started searching. Within seconds, his face went pale. There is video posted 20 minutes ago from a neighbor's security camera. It is already being shared widely. He turned the tablet toward Marcus. The video was grainy but clear enough. It showed Marcus on his knees in the rain, handcuffed, surrounded by police officers. The audio was muffled, but you could hear voices, including Mitchell's mocking laughter when Marcus had identified himself as NSA director. The person who posted it had added a caption. This is how police treat a black man in America, even when he is the director of the NSA. As they watched, the view count climbed. Hundreds, then thousands of views in real time. The comments section was already exploding with reactions ranging from outrage to support for the police to conspiracy theories about what had really happened. Well, Marcus said quietly, I guess the decision about going public has been made for me. Within an hour, the story was everywhere. Major news networks were reporting it. Hashtags were trending. Politicians were issuing statements. The video had been viewed over 1 million times, shared by celebrities and activists and ordinary people who saw in Marcus's experience an echo of their own fears and frustrations. Marcus's phone would not stop ringing. Reporters had somehow gotten his number. His official office was being flooded with calls. The NSA press team was scrambling to prepare a statement. The White House had called 3 times asking for information and offering support. "This is moving fast," Morrison said, scrolling through news alerts. "We need to get ahead of it with an official statement." Marcus nodded slowly. "All right. But the statement needs to be honest. I am not going to minimize what happened or make excuses for those officers, and I am not going to let this become just a story about me. This happens to people every day who do not have my resources or position." They worked on the statement together, Marcus insisting on certain language, pushing back against Morrison's attempts to soften the harder edges. After several drafts, they had something Marcus could live with. It was scheduled to be released at 6 in the morning. Time to catch the morning news cycle. But at 3 in the morning, Marcus was still awake, sitting in his home office, watching the story evolve online in real time. The reactions were predictable in their divisiveness. Some saw it as clear evidence of systemic racism. Others insisted there must be more to the story. Some said Marcus should have identified himself immediately. Others pointed out that he had and was mocked for it. There were also the inevitable attacks on Marcus himself. People digging into his past, looking for anything to discredit him. Old photos were analyzed. His career decisions were questioned. Some suggested he had staged the whole thing for attention. Others claimed he was being used by political forces to create division. The price of speaking truth, Marcus had learned long ago, was that people would try to destroy you rather than face uncomfortable realities. His son, Michael, a Marine Corps officer stationed overseas, sent him a message just as dawn began to break. "Saw what happened, Dad. Are you all right? More importantly, what are you going to do about it?" That question stayed with Marcus as morning arrived and the official statement went out. What was he going to do about it? One statement would not be enough. One conversation would not fix the problem. The question was not what he would do in response to this one incident, but what he could do about the system that had created it. The morning news shows led with the story. Marcus's official statement was read and analyzed. The video was played over and over. Legal experts weighed in on whether the stop was justified. Police representatives defended the officers' actions, saying they were following procedures based on the information they had. Civil rights leaders called for federal investigations and reform. By noon, the Arlington Police Department held a press conference. The chief of police, a black woman named Angela Rodriguez, looked uncomfortable as she addressed the media. She confirmed the incident had occurred and said it was under investigation. But she stopped short of apologizing or admitting any wrongdoing by her officers. "Our officers responded to a call about suspicious activity," Chief Rodriguez said. "They followed their training and protocols." Director Thompson was released as soon as his identity was verified. "We take all allegations of misconduct seriously and are conducting a thorough review." Marcus watched the press conference from his office at NSA headquarters. He had insisted on going to work despite Morrison's suggestion that he take a few days off. Staying home would have felt like hiding, like admitting he was the one who had done something wrong. That was a lot of words to avoid saying they made a mistake, Morrison observed, standing beside Marcus as they watched the screen. "She is in an impossible position," Marcus replied. "Admit wrongdoing and she exposes the department to lawsuits and criticism. Defend the officers and she looks like she is justifying racial profiling. There is no good option for her." "There was a good option last night," Morrison said. "Those officers could have verified your identity before putting you in handcuffs. They could have treated you with the same respect they would have given to anyone else. They could have not assumed the worst based on nothing but skin color." Marcus nodded. That was the heart of it. Not procedures or protocols or policies, but the fundamental assumptions people made about black bodies in America. The presumption of danger, of criminality, of not belonging. No amount of education or achievement or service could fully overcome that presumption, because it was not based on logic or evidence. It was based on centuries of conditioning that saw black as other, black as threat, black as less than. His phone rang with a call from the White House. The president wanted to speak with him. Marcus took a deep breath and answered. "Marcus, I just saw the video," the president said without preamble. "This is unacceptable. Absolutely unacceptable. What can I do to help?" "Thank you, sir. Right now, I am focused on making sure there is a proper investigation and that this leads to meaningful change. Not just for me, but for everyone who faces this kind of treatment. I want you to know you have my full support. I am going to mention this situation in my remarks today. The American people need to hear from their president that what happened to you was wrong. After the call ended, Marcus felt the weight of what was happening settle more heavily on his shoulders. This was no longer just his story. It had become a national moment, a flashpoint in the ongoing struggle over race and justice in America. People were looking to him for leadership, for wisdom, for solutions to problems that had persisted for generations. He thought about all the intelligence briefings he had sat through, all the threats he had analyzed, all the operations he had overseen. In all of that work, the enemy was always external. Foreign terrorists, hostile nations, cyber criminals. But the threat he had faced last night came from within. It came from his own country's law enforcement, from the people sworn to protect and serve. And unlike the external threats he dealt with professionally, this one could not be defeated with intelligence gathering or military action. It required something much harder to achieve, changing hearts and minds, confronting uncomfortable truths, and building systems that treated all people with equal dignity and respect. The rest of the day was a blur of meetings, calls, and interviews. Marcus gave a carefully controlled interview to a major news network, choosing his words precisely to make his point without being inflammatory. He spoke about the fear he had felt, the humiliation, the anger. But he also spoke about systemic issues, about implicit bias in policing, about the need for reform and accountability. This was not about bad apples, Marcus said to the interviewer. This was about a system that too often sees black people as threats first and citizens second. It was about assumptions that get made before a single word is spoken. It was about the difference between how I was treated and how I would have been treated if I were white. The interviewer asked if he planned to press charges. I am still considering all my options, Marcus replied. But what I really want is not punishment for these specific officers. What I want is change. I want training that addresses implicit bias. I want accountability systems that work. I want policies that prevent this from happening to others. Because the truth is, this happens every day. The only difference with my situation is that I have a platform to talk about it. As the sun set on one of the longest days of his life, Marcus finally returned home. Sarah met him at the door and they held each other without speaking for a long moment. The house was quiet, the earlier chaos replaced by exhausted peace. "How are you doing?" Sarah asked. "Honestly, I do not know. I feel angry and sad and tired all at once. I keep thinking about what could have happened if things had gone differently. If one of those officers had been more aggressive, if the situation had escalated further, if I had made one wrong move. But you did not. You kept your composure. You stayed calm. You survived. I survived because I knew how to navigate a situation that should never have happened in the first place. I survived because I had the resources and connections to get help. But that should not be the standard. People should not need to be perfect victims just to be treated with basic human dignity." Sarah led him to the couch and they sat together, her head on his shoulder. Outside, the media trucks had finally left, though a few reporters still lingered down the street, hoping for another glimpse of the story. "What happens next?" Sarah asked. "Change," Marcus said, though he was not entirely sure what that would look like or how to make it happen. Somehow, someway, this has to lead to change. Otherwise, what was it all for? 3 weeks after the incident, Marcus sat in a conference room at the Department of Justice, surrounded by officials from various federal agencies and local law enforcement representatives. The investigation into what had happened that rainy September night had uncovered troubling details, and now there was a push for comprehensive reform. The dispatch recordings had been particularly revealing. The call that initiated the stop had come from a resident on Maple Street, a man named Harold Perkins who had lived in the neighborhood for 40 years. His exact words to the 911 operator were seared into Marcus's memory. "There is a black male in a dark sedan driving slowly through the neighborhood. He looks suspicious. He keeps looking at the houses like he is casing them for a robbery." When investigators had interviewed Perkins, he had been defensive at first, insisting he had just been trying to protect his neighborhood. But eventually, under careful questioning, the truth had emerged. Perkins had seen Marcus drive through the neighborhood dozens of times over the 3 years Marcus had lived there. He knew Marcus lived on the street. He had never bothered to learn his neighbor's name or occupation. But he knew the black man with the expensive car did not fit his image of who belonged in that neighborhood. The night of the incident, Perkins had been drinking. He had been watching the news, getting angry about stories of crime in the city. When he saw Marcus drive by, something in him snapped. He made the call not because he genuinely believed Marcus was a criminal, but because he wanted to assert some control, to push back against the changes he saw in his world. He had wielded the police like a weapon, knowing that his word as a white resident would carry weight. Perkins has been charged with filing a false police report, the Justice Department attorney said, pulling Marcus back to the present meeting. But the bigger issue is how the police responded to that report. That was the other damning revelation. When dispatch had relayed the call to patrol units, they had run Marcus's license plate. The system had immediately flagged that the vehicle was registered to Marcus Thompson, with an address on Maple Street. There was also a notation in the system that Marcus was a federal employee with high-level security clearance. All of this information was available to the officers before they made the decision to pursue. Sergeant Mitchell had seen that information. He had known Marcus lived in the neighborhood, but he had chosen to proceed with the stop anyway, convinced that there must be some mistake in the records, that a black man could not really live there, could not really hold such an important position. His prejudice had been stronger than the evidence right in front of him. The dash camera footage is equally problematic, another attorney continued. We can hear the officers discussing the situation before the stop. Mitchell specifically tells his team to treat this as a high-risk stop, despite having no evidence of any crime or danger. He orders them to draw weapons and prepare for potential resistance, all based on a vague suspicious person call and his own assumptions. Marcus listened to all of this with a strange sense of detachment. The details confirmed what he already knew in his heart. This had not been a simple mistake or a case of confused identity. It had been racism, plain and simple, backed by the force of law and the power of badges and guns. What made it particularly insidious was that all the proper procedures had been technically followed. Mitchell had responded to a citizen complaint. He had conducted a stop based on that complaint. He had secured a potentially armed individual. On paper, everything looked justified. It was only when you examined the why behind each decision that the rot became visible. We are recommending a comprehensive retraining program for the entire Arlington Police Department, Chief Rodriguez said. She had been brought into the meeting to discuss reform measures. Since the incident, she had been walking a tightrope, trying to restore community trust while managing a police force that largely believed they had done nothing wrong. We want to focus on implicit bias, de-escalation techniques, and community policing methods. Marcus had heard these promises before. After every high-profile incident of police misconduct, there were calls for training and reform. Sometimes changes were implemented, but too often they were superficial, checking boxes without changing culture or behavior. Real change required more than training sessions and updated policy manuals. Training is a start, Marcus said, speaking for the first time in the meeting. But it is not enough. We need accountability mechanisms that actually work. We need transparency in how complaints are handled. We need to examine the culture that made multiple officers think it was acceptable to treat me that way, and then laugh about it. What would you suggest? Chief Rodriguez asked. There was genuine curiosity in her voice, not defensiveness. Marcus had spent the past 3 weeks thinking about this question. He had consulted with civil rights leaders, criminal justice reform advocates, and community organizers. He had read studies and reports and listened to countless stories of people who had experienced similar or worse treatment. Out of all that research and reflection, some clear priorities had emerged. First, we need early intervention systems that identify officers who show patterns of problematic behavior before they escalate to serious incidents. The data shows that a small percentage of officers account for a disproportionate number of complaints. If we can identify and address those issues early, we can prevent harm. Chief Rodriguez nodded, taking notes. Second, we need true community oversight with real authority, not advisory boards that can be ignored, but civilian review panels with the power to investigate, subpoena records, and recommend discipline that must be taken seriously. That will be a tough sell with the police union, one of the local officials said. I imagine it will be, Marcus replied, but that is where leadership comes in. If the police see themselves as warriors fighting against the community, We will keep having these incidents. If they see themselves as guardians working with the community, everything changes. Leadership has to model and reinforce that guardian mindset. Marcus continued outlining his vision for reform. Body cameras with strict policies about when they must be activated, and severe penalties for turning them off. De-escalation training that actually changed how officers approached situations. Removing police from certain calls that did not require armed response, like mental health crises or minor traffic issues. Creating real consequences for officers who violated policies or people's rights. These are substantial changes, the Justice Department attorney said. Some of them will require legislative action. Then we need to push for that legislation, Marcus said firmly. I have spent my career dealing with threats to national security. But I am telling you, the erosion of trust between communities and police is a national security issue. When people do not believe the system will protect them, when they see law enforcement as a threat rather than a help, it undermines the social fabric that holds our democracy together. The meeting continued for 2 more hours, with various officials debating the details of different reform proposals. Marcus could see the complexity of it all, the competing interests and institutional resistance to change. But he also saw opportunity. His story had opened a door, created a moment of attention and pressure that could be leveraged for meaningful reform. After the meeting, Chief Rodriguez asked to speak with Marcus privately. They walked to a quiet corner of the building away from the others. I want to apologize, she said, not just for what happened, but for how I initially handled it. I was trying to protect the department, and in doing so, I failed to acknowledge the harm that was done to you. Marcus studied her face. Rodriguez had a reputation as a reformer, someone who genuinely wanted to improve policing. But she was also constrained by the realities of leading a department full of officers who resisted change. I appreciate that, Marcus said, but the apology I really need is not to me personally. It is to every person in your jurisdiction who has been treated with disrespect or violence because of who they are. It is in the form of actual change, not just words. I know, Rodriguez said, and I am committed to that. But I need help. The resistance inside the department is fierce. Officers feel attacked and defensive. They see all criticism as anti-police rather than pro-accountability. That defensive crouch is part of the problem, Marcus said. Good officers should want to get rid of bad officers. They should want systems that build trust with the community. The resistance to accountability from police unions and officers tells you something important about the culture. Rodriguez sighed. You are right, but changing culture is slow work. We do not have time for slow, Marcus replied. People are dying. Lives are being destroyed. Communities are being traumatized. We need urgency, not patience. That evening, Marcus met with a group of activists and community leaders who had been working on police reform for years. They gathered in a church basement on the other side of town, a diverse group representing different neighborhoods and experiences. When Marcus arrived, there was a moment of tension. Some in the group were skeptical of him, seeing him as part of the establishment rather than a true ally in their fight. A young woman named Tamika, who had lost her brother to police violence 2 years earlier, spoke first. No disrespect, Director Thompson, but where were you before this happened to you? People in our community have been screaming about these issues for decades. Why does it take one of you getting treated badly for people to pay attention? It was a fair question and one Marcus had been asking himself. You are absolutely right, he said. I was aware of these issues intellectually, but I did not feel them personally the way I should have.